It was in the dwindling days of October, that season when London's breath turns to mist and her moods to melancholy, that I, Dr. John H. Watson, found myself once again drawn into the singular workings of my companion's formidable mind. The lamps along Baker Street burned dull amber through the encroaching fog, and a soft rain pattered against the window-panes of our shared lodgings at 221B. Holmes was in one of his silent moods, stretched languidly upon the settee, pipe between his lips, gaze fixed not upon any object in the room, but on some theatre of abstraction only he could see. "I gather from your restlessness," Holmes murmured without turning his head, "that your patience is beginning to wear thin." I started, for I had indeed risen from my chair and was pacing the carpet without conscious intent. "Merely the weather," I replied. "And a touch of cabin fever, perhaps. You've not stirred all morning, Holmes." "My dear Watson," he said with faint amusement, "a tiger does not pace the cage until it scents a worthy prey. And prey, I suspect, is precisely what is about to arrive." As if on cue, Mrs. Hudson's steps sounded on the stair, followed by a discreet knock. She entered with a card upon a tray and a faint expression of alarm beneath her usual composure. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes." "In quite a state, if I may say so." Holmes took the card, examined it briefly, and sat up. "Sir Elric Mortlake," he said aloud, "chairman of the British Antiquarian Society." "Interesting." "Mortlake?" I echoed. "The name is familiar." "Indeed, Watson. A rather reclusive academic, but highly respected in circles dealing with rare manuscripts and medieval folklore. I believe he recently sponsored the restoration of an abbey in Wiltshire. Send him in, Mrs. Hudson." A moment later, our visitor entered tall, cloaked, and disheveled. His eyes darted around the room with a feverish intensity, and his lips trembled even as he struggled to compose himself. He looked, a man pushed to the brink, not by violence, but by something subtler. "Holmes," he said, voice strained, "I have come not with a case, but a cry for help. Something is destroying me, quietly, relentlessly, and I fear it shall not be long before I am undone altogether." Holmes motioned him to a chair. "Begin at the beginning, Sir Elric." He swallowed and steadied his hands against his knees. "It started with a whisper." "A whisper?" I asked. He nodded. "Not imagined, not metaphorical. A literal whisper. At first, I thought it an intruder. I even changed my staff, moved rooms, slept with a revolver beneath my pillow. But it returned always just as I was about to sleep. A whispering voice, soft and fragmented, speaking my name, and other things I dare not repeat. And now," he broke off, glancing about nervously, as though expecting the very whisper to rise from our walls. Holmes leaned forward. "And now," Sir Elric hesitated, "now the voice is not confined to the night. It follows me in corridors, through crowds, even in the library at Cambridge. No one else hears it. No one else believes it. But I know it's real." Holmes steepled his fingers, eyes narrowing. "And this whisper, it coincided with a particular event, did it not?" Mortlake's eyes widened. Yes. I suppose it began shortly after I returned from a business at the vaults beneath Renly Hall." Holmes looked over at me briefly, then returned his gaze to our trembling visitor. "Tell us about Renly Hall." Sir Elric shuddered. "It is an ancestral property in Dorsetshire. I went there to oversee the transport of certain rare artifacts, Roman, mostly to the British Museum. But I was warned by the caretaker, an old man named Garvin, not to disturb one particular chamber beneath the chapel. Local superstition. I paid it no mind. I even went down myself to inspect a sarcophagus, an unusual piece, inscribed in an archaic tongue I could not place. I opened it. It was empty, or I thought it was." "You think now you were wrong?" Holmes asked. "I think something came out," Sir Elric whispered. "Not something physical, but something, and ever since then, I have heard the voice. Holmes rose, his long limbs unfolding like those of a waking spider. "Sir Elric," he said gravely, "you are not mad, but you are in danger, and not merely from your imagination. We shall take the next train to Dorsetshire. Watson, pack your revolver. It appears we are to meet a whisper that breaks men." And so began one of the most chilling and methodical cases in our long catalogue of mysteries. A case where fear itself wore a mask more convincing than flesh, and where a whisper in the dark threatened to unravel reason. Holmes said little as we made our way through the fog-bound streets to Paddington Station. His lean figure moved swiftly beneath his long coat, the collar turned up against the chill, and I followed in silence, content to let him dwell in whatever plane of thought he inhabited. It was not until we were seated in the first-class carriage, the landscape of London beginning to blur past the window, that he spoke again. "You observed Sir Elric's right cuff, Watson?" "I did," I replied, though I confess I saw nothing out of the ordinary. "Ah, but there was," Holmes said with a faint smile. "It was smudged with a trace of ochre soil, not red clay of the London type, but a lighter, chalkier variant. Precisely the sort of soil one finds near the foundations of certain Roman ruins. Renly Hall sits atop such ground, if I am not mistaken. You think he returned there recently?" "I think," Holmes replied, drawing on his pipe, "that he never truly left. He carries the place with him, in his mind, in his nerves. It is no longer merely a hall of stone, but a prison of dread, and I mean to unlock its gates." The train whistle echoed through the countryside as we approached Dorset, the trees skeletal and windswept, fields blurred beneath a grey sky. By the time we arrived at the small station of Renly, dusk had already fallen. A closed carriage awaited us, driven by a silent coachman whom Sir Elric had evidently arranged in advance. He was not present himself, preferring, it seemed, to remain in London. Holmes tapped the side of the carriage absently as we rolled toward the manor. "Tell me, Watson, do you believe a whisper can kill a man?" I considered the question. "In the medical sense, no. But psychologically, certainly. Fear can drive a man to ruin, even to death. Especially if he is already predisposed." Holmes nodded. "Quite so. But we must determine whether this is a case of suggestion or of design. Someone may be orchestrating the fear." The carriage came to a halt before iron gates, behind which loomed Renly Hall, a vast, brooding structure of stone, with sharp gables and shuttered windows, its silhouette jagged against the pale moon. The air was heavy with silence. No servants greeted us as we stepped down, and the wind rustled through overgrown hedges like a warning unheeded. The front doors creaked open before we could knock. A man stood within gaunt. His spine stooped like a question mark, eyes pale and filmed. He carried a lantern and did not flinch when Holmes stepped forward. "Garvin, I presume," Holmes said. The old caretaker nodded slowly. "You were expected," he rasped, "though I hoped you'd not come." "You fear this place?" I asked. Garvin looked past me into the shadows beyond the gate. "I fear what it holds. Some things sleep better in darkness. Men who stir the grave often wake what they cannot bury." Holmes stepped inside without hesitation. "Take us to the vault." We passed through long corridors lined with faded tapestries and suits of rusted armor, the air growing colder as we descended deeper. At last, we reached a narrow stone staircase spiraling downward into the chapel's undercroft. The walls sweated dampness, and the lantern's glow flickered on the ancient carvings that lined the passage, crude renderings of angels and beasts, some worn smooth by time, others disturbingly intact. At the bottom, we entered a small circular chamber. Here lay the sarcophagus. It was unlike any I had seen, neither Roman nor Saxon in appearance, but something older, more primal. The stone was dark, nearly black, and traced with silver lines that shimmered like veins. The lid lay slightly ajar. Holmes approached it, his eyes gleaming in the lantern light. "No seals," he murmured. "No markings of sanctity. Only the script. Have you seen this language before, Watson?" I examined the inscription. The characters were jagged, looping in unnatural patterns, wholly unfamiliar to me. No, not Greek, not Latin, not even Hebrew. It feels wrong. Holmes nodded. That is the precise word, wrong, like a melody in a dissonant key. "Sir Elric opened this?" "Yes," Garvin said. "I told him not to. I begged him, but he laughed, then went pale. And since then, he has heard the whisper." Holmes finished. Suddenly, the lantern flickered and went out. Darkness clamped around us, thick and suffocating. I heard a sound, not loud, but sharp, like breath drawn too quickly. Then silence. Garvin lit the lantern again with trembling hands. Holmes was already on one knee, examining the base of the sarcophagus with his magnifying glass. "There are scratches," he said. "Fine, fresh scratches. Someone or something moved this lid recently, within the last few days. But the hall is abandoned," I said. Holmes looked at Garvin. "Who else has keys to this place?" "No one," the caretaker said. "Only me. And I haven't been near this tomb since Sir Elric left." Holmes straightened. "Then someone else has come, perhaps more than once. Someone with knowledge of this tomb or a reason to keep it unsealed. Back in the manor, we took rooms in the west wing, far from the vaults. Holmes refused dinner and instead paced before the fire, his mind clearly racing. "What are you thinking?" I asked at last. He turned toward me, eyes sharp. "That Sir Elric may not be the only victim, and that the whisper is not merely a symptom of fear, but a weapon carefully employed. This house has secrets still, Watson, and we must find them before they find us." That night, I slept lightly. The wind howled outside, and now and then I thought I heard footsteps in the corridor. But I told myself it was my imagination until, shortly before dawn, I woke to the unmistakable sound of whispering just beyond the door. A low, hissing murmur, as if someone were speaking into the keyhole. I sprang up and flung the door open. The corridor was empty, silent, yet on the floor, near the threshold, I found something. A folded scrap of parchment, upon which had been scrawled, in that same jagged, unnatural script, a single word. Holmes stood behind me, already dressed. He had not slept. He took the parchment and studied it. "Yes," he said softly, "I was right." Holmes looked at me with an expression I could not read. "It says, 'Remember.'" Holmes examined the slip of parchment under the oil lamp with a studied intensity. I watched his eyes track the ridges in the paper, as though it whispered secrets only he could hear. The strange script shimmered faintly, as though it had been written in some ink that caught the light differently. When he had finished, he folded the paper neatly and slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat. "This, Watson," he murmured, "is no idle mischief. We are not dealing with phantoms or overworked nerves. There is a guiding intelligence behind this whisper, and now it knows we're here." Breakfasted quickly, Holmes more out of ritual than appetite, and by mid-morning we descended once again to the undercroft. Garvin awaited us there, pale as parchment but resigned to our continued prying. Holmes carried with him a length of cord, chalk, and a small measuring rule. "I require silence," Holmes said, and for the next half-hour he examined every surface of the chamber, the floor stones, the sarcophagus, and the arched vaults above. He paused longest at a corner of the room, where the moisture stains took on a darker tone. He scraped gently at the stone with a penknife and caught a few flecks in a paper envelope. "Blood," he said simply, as though announcing the weather. "Dried?" I asked. "Dried, certainly, but no more than a week old. And if I do not misjudge the pattern of its spray, it came not from within the sarcophagus, but from something or someone who stood above it and turned away swiftly." Garvin leaned against the wall. I told Sir Elric, he said. This place was never meant for men to touch. Holmes made no reply. He stepped away from the darkened corner and bent again over the open sarcophagus. You say it was empty when you opened it? Yes, Garvin said. Clean. Unnaturally so. Holmes reached into his coat and withdrew a thin glass wand, tipped with silver. He waved it slowly within the stone hollow, watching the end carefully. I raised an eyebrow. What is that device? A chemical vapor tester, recently acquired. If any lingering trace of ammonia, alkaloid compound, or preservation agent remains, this will detect it. The wand remained inert. Holmes frowned and withdrew it. No trace of body or embalming, he muttered. Yet this tomb was sealed until recently. That suggests one of two things. Either it once held something meant never to decompose, or it was never intended to hold a body at all. He stood. We must speak again with Sir Elric. Once, requesting his immediate return. Holmes instructed the local telegraph clerk in terms that brooked no delay, and by the following evening, Sir Elric Mortlake arrived at Renly Hall, looking no better for the time away. His eyes were rimmed with shadow, and his hands trembled as he removed his gloves. I should not have come back, he muttered as he entered the drawing room. I feel it already, that pressure at the edge of the mind. It's stronger here. Then it is good you returned, Holmes said briskly. For if your fears have a source, we must find it, and if they do not, then we must prove so to liberate your reason. He motioned for Sir Elric to sit, then leaned forward, steepling his fingers. I must ask plainly, Sir Elric. When you opened that sarcophagus, what did you see? Truly. The man swallowed, eyes fixed on the fire. Nothing at first. Then a shadow. It moved, but there was no light to cast it. Holmes did not react. Did you touch anything? Yes. There was a stone tablet resting at the base. I thought it curious. It had markings, similar to those on the outside. I took it up, and then, he shuddered. The whisper came. First a word, then a name. Holmes's voice was quiet. Whose name? Mine. There was a silence. Then Holmes rose. You have that tablet still? Sir Elric nodded. I brought it to London. It's in my study. Locked drawer. I must see it. Immediately. Watson, prepare our things. We return tonight. The journey back was made under a heavy sky. Thunder rolled in the distance, and the lamps along the rails flickered like ghost lanterns in the rain. Sir Elric spoke little, and Holmes remained fixed in thought, his brow drawn and hands clasped before him. When we arrived at Sir Elric's townhouse, a sober Georgian residence along Upper Wimpole Street, the hour was nearly 10. A butler admitted us wordlessly, clearly under instruction, and Holmes wasted no time in making for the study. The room was richly appointed. Shelves of leather-bound volumes, a carved desk, and a long window overlooking the gas-lit street. Sir Elric moved to the desk, fumbled with a key from his chain, and withdrew a wrapped object about the size of a book. It was swathed in cloth, and he hesitated a moment before handing it to Holmes, as though it might bite. Holmes set it upon the desk and slowly peeled away the layers. Beneath lay a stone tablet, no more than half an inch thick, inscribed with that same alien script. But more disturbing was the image carved in relief upon its surface, a stylized human figure, bound in chains of vine, surrounded by shapes that were neither human nor animal. Their forms were curved, incomplete, and suggestive of motion. Eyes, many and unblinking, encircled the scene. Watson felt the hairs rise along the back of his neck. Holmes, however, showed no fear, only intense concentration. This script, he said, is neither decorative nor symbolic. It is instructional. I suspect it was meant not to be read by many, only by one. He turned the tablet slightly. Look here, Watson, a depression along the edge. Something was meant to slot into this, perhaps another tablet, or a frame. It is incomplete. Sir Elric began to shiver violently. Burn it, he whispered. Throw it into the fire, I beg you." "No," Holmes said firmly. "Not yet." A knock came at the study door. The butler entered, hesitant. "A gentleman, sir. Says he must speak with Mr. Holmes. Refuses to give a name." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. Show him in." The man who entered was striking in appearance, tall, silver-haired, dressed in clerical black. His eyes were an unnerving shade of grey, and he carried no hat. Holmes regarded him with polite suspicion. "You know who I am?" the stranger asked in a deep, precise voice. "I know that you are not expected, and yet you knew to find me here," Holmes replied. "That suggests you are either very well informed or part of the matter I'm presently investigating." The man smiled faintly. "Both, Mr. Holmes." He turned to Sir Elric. "You were warned not to disturb the tomb. You were told that the whisperer binds itself to those who awaken it. Now it cannot be silenced." Sir Elric rose, pale with fury and fear. "Who are you? How do you know this?" The stranger stepped forward. "I am Father Aldwych, one of the last of the custodians of Renly's inner circle. We were charged, long ago, with ensuring the vault was never opened. You have broken that trust." Holmes' voice cut through the tension. "Then perhaps you'd care to enlighten us, Father, before someone dies of shadows and silence. Tell us what exactly the Whisperer is." The priest turned his gaze to Holmes, and for the first time there was uncertainty in his eyes. "It is not a ghost," he said, "nor a demon in the Christian sense. It is a memory, a weaponized fragment of will. The last vestige of a man who learned to embed his consciousness into stone, to haunt not the flesh, but the mind. And that memory, awakened, seeks only to inhabit a new host." Holmes leaned back, arms crossed. "Then our next step is clear. We must find the remaining piece of the tablet and destroy them both." Father Aldwych bowed his head. "You have little time." Sir Elric's voice cracked. "What do you mean?" The priest's grey eyes turned toward him. "Because the whisper has found your name, and soon it will no longer need to speak it aloud." Holmes glanced at me. "Watson, no sleep tonight. We begin at once." The study fell into a taut silence after Father Aldwich's final words, the implications settling around us like the dense London fog beyond the windows. Sir Elric sat motionless, hands gripping the arms of his chair as though anchoring himself in the physical world. He, however, was already in motion, his eyes scanning the walls, the fireplace, the bookshelves alert for anything out of place, anything concealed. It was his manner when an answer hovered just beyond reach. Restless, precise, expectant. "Father Aldwych," he said at length, his voice calm but edged with steel. "If this whisperer is indeed an embedded consciousness, as you claim a remnant of some ancient mind preserved in stone, then we are not confronting a mere hallucination. We are dealing with an intelligence, however fragmentary, which must operate by some mechanism, and like all mechanisms, it can be disrupted." The priest gave a slow nod. "The other half of the tablet holds the binding. Without it, the whisperer cannot be expelled." "Then where is it?" Holmes asked, already knowing the answer was unlikely to be simple. Father Aldwich's expression darkened. "Lost. Separated long ago and hidden elsewhere to ensure it could never be reassembled. The Abbey once held it until the dissolution. Since then, I do not know." Holmes frowned. "We must narrow the field. Someone left that parchment beneath Watson's door. That indicates proximity, access, and intent. Someone wants Sir Elric to remember something, or rather, someone wants to make sure he does not forget. I spoke for the first time in some minutes. But why target Mortlake? He did not create this evil. He merely uncovered it." Holmes tapped the desk lightly. "Precisely. And in doing so, he became host to something incomplete, something desperate to finish what was started. The tablet, in essence, is the phylactery of this mind, The missing half the key. He turned to Father Aldwych. You said your order was charged with guarding the tomb. How many of you remain? The priest hesitated. 3. Myself and 2 others, both aging, and neither in London. Holmes pressed. Names. Locations. Brother Toller, residing in a convalescent retreat in Exeter. The other, Brother Verus, vanished nearly a decade ago. Some say he joined a monastery in France. Others believe he took the missing half with him. Holmes' expression grew sharper. Then our task is twofold. Protect Sir Elric from further contact, and recover the second half before the Whisperer completes its grip. I shall send a wire to Exeter at once. Watson, we must search this house, not for ghosts, but for records. Sir Elric, your father, was also a collector of the rare and arcane, was he not? Yes, the shaken man replied. His study is upstairs. I've not touched it since his passing. Then that is where we begin. We climb the stairs, led by the flickering light of a candelabrum. The upper rooms were cloaked in dust, their doors sealed like tombs of their own. Sir Elric unlocked a heavy door at the end of the corridor and stood aside. Holmes entered without hesitation. The room was thick with age-old wood, stale parchment, forgotten chemicals. Shelves lined every wall, sagging under the weight of obscure volumes and leather folios. The desk at the center was half buried under layers of papers, dried ink pots, and a tarnished astrolabe. Holmes moved as though guided by instinct, lifting pages, testing the bindings of books, pausing at odd intervals to draw out documents which he tucked beneath his arm. I examined a shelf near the window, thick tomes on druidic rites, medieval astronomy, demonology, and one slim ledger bound in green morocco. I handed it to Holmes, who flipped through it quickly. Ah, he murmured. This is not a catalogue of acquisitions, it's a record of correspondences. Look here, Watson, a letter from 1V. Dated 1883, no address. He read aloud, I have done what I must. The fragment cannot be allowed to return to its twin. Its voice still scratches at my thoughts. I have placed it beneath the roots, where the earth remembers nothing. Let the centuries bury it. Again. V, Holmes repeated. Brother Verus? Beneath the roots, I said. It sounds metaphorical. Holmes shook his head. Not to a man accustomed to cloistered discipline. It is likely literal, a tree, perhaps ancient, perhaps symbolic to his order. The earth forgets, but the Whisperer remembers. He turned to Sir Elric. Was your father a member of any society? Antiquarian? Occult? Fraternal? Elric blinked. Yes, the Order of the Silent Leaf. A curious little circle of historians and ritualists. They met at Kew Gardens once a season. My father often spoke of a great tree, the heartwood. Holmes was already at the door. Then we go to Kew. Though the hour was late, Holmes pulled strings with a speed I have only seen equaled by royalty and criminals. By midnight, we were met at the gate of the Botanical Gardens by a yawning groundsman under orders from his superior to grant us temporary access. Under his watchful lantern, we traversed the narrow paths, shadowed by exotic fronds and the scent of wet moss. The heartwood stood in a secluded clearing at the far end, an immense, ancient oak, its gnarled roots spreading like fingers across the earth. Beneath its boughs was a bench, and, beside it, a worn stone plaque. To those who keep the silence. Holmes dropped to his knees and began examining the ground at the base of the tree. He produced a small trowel from his satchel and began to dig. I joined him, while Sir Elric and Father Aldwych stood silently in the dark. Barely 5 inches down, Holmes struck something solid. Together, we unearthed a small, lichen-covered casket of stone. Its surface bore the same markings as the first tablet, but this time with a border carved like braided thorns. With great care, Holmes lifted the lid. Inside, nested in folds of dry cloth, lay the second half of the tablet. The moment it was exposed, Sir Elric staggered backward with a cry, his face contorted, eyes rolling. breath choking in his throat. Holmes reacted instantly. "Cover it!" I slammed the lid shut, and the night seemed to exhale. Sir Elric collapsed to the ground, gasping. His skin, for the briefest second, had gone pale as bone. Holmes knelt beside him, checking his pulse. "It's begun," he muttered. "It knows we've found what it needs." Father Aldwych stood above us. "Now we must finish it. At first light, we take both pieces back to Renly and perform the rite of sunderance. Once joined, the Whisperer will seek to complete itself. We must destroy it before it succeeds." Holmes nodded grimly. "Then let us hope it does not speak again before morning, for if it does, I fear we may lose Sir Elric and far more." The carriage, carrying us back to Renly Hall, rattled over uneven country roads as a pale light crept into the sky. Holmes sat upright, the stone casket cradled beside him beneath a heavy woolen wrap. Sir Elric had regained consciousness, though his color was poor, and his hands still trembled. He sat slumped in the corner, head bowed, avoiding all eye contact. Father Aldwych rode opposite us in silence, his eyes fixed on the horizon, lips moving faintly in prayer or calculation, I could not say which. As dawn broke over the Dorsetshire hills, mist still clung to the fields like a shroud. The manor emerged from the haze slowly, bleak and mute. No welcome awaited us at the gate. Garvin, the caretaker, was nowhere to be seen. Holmes noted this with narrowed eyes. "Odd," he said. "Garvin strikes me as the sort who would await us at the door with keys in hand. Watson, help me carry this." Together we bore the casket into the hall and up the stair to the great library, which Father Aldwych had designated as suitable for the ritual. Its stone floor and thick walls, he insisted, would contain the forces they meant to provoke. Sir Elric followed like a shadow, listless and quiet, while Holmes moved with brisk purpose, setting the two tablet halves upon a wide wooden table. He aligned them carefully, watching the gaps between the shards like a chess master preparing his final gambit. The pieces fit together with a soft, almost inaudible click. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the temperature dropped perceptibly. A whisper brushed past us, not through the air, but through the mind, an inner murmur that stirred memory and dread without articulation. Sir Elric let out a sharp cry and stumbled back, knocking over a chair. Holmes looked to Aldwych. "Begin." The priest produced a slim, black volume from within his coat and began to chant in a low, rhythmic cadence. The language was Latin, but heavily corrupted, run through with older cadences and strange assonance. As he spoke, the markings on the tablet began to glow faintly, the silver inlay pulsing like breath. Holmes had placed a circle of salt around the table earlier, and now he stepped behind it, motioning for me and Sir Elric to stay clear. I could see tension in Holmes's face now, though he concealed it well, a flicker at the corner of his eye, a tightening of his jaw. Sir Elric gripped my arm. "It's coming back," he whispered. "The voice. It's speaking now, clearer than ever." "What is it saying?" He shuddered. "It's not words anymore. It's intent. It wants me to join it, to let it in." The chanting grew louder. A wind seemed to stir inside the room, though the windows were closed tight. The candelabras flickered violently, casting monstrous shadows across the walls. The tablet on the table began to hum, not audibly, but in the bones, in the teeth. A pressure built in the room, as if the air itself resisted breath. Suddenly, Sir Elric broke free from my grasp and lunged toward the table. Holmes was quicker. He moved in a blur, intercepting Elric mid-stride and forcing him backward. "Hold him, Watson!" I seized Sir Elric's arms and wrestled him to the ground. His strength was unnatural in that moment, frenzied and wild. His eyes rolled, and he screamed not in pain but in fury. "She's calling me!" he shrieked. "She knows my name now. I can feel her, in the bones of my skull." "She?" Holmes said sharply. A feminine voice? Sir Elric collapsed, weeping. Not a voice. A presence. older than thought. But, yes, it feels like a woman, a grieving one. Holmes' eyes flicked to Aldwych, who had ceased his chant and stood frozen, hand still raised. That was never mentioned, Holmes said. The priest hesitated. The identity is not known. Some believe the consciousness to be that of a forgotten queen, a prophetess or seer, whose mind was preserved in rites lost to time. Holmes' expression darkened. And you let us attempt to dismantle it without knowing that detail. There was no choice, Aldwych snapped. To leave it unbroken is to let it grow. You've seen what it does. A shattering sound silenced us all. We turned toward the table. The tablet had split down the middle, not along the ancient join, but directly through the heart of the image, bisecting the bound figure at its center. From the fracture oozed not blood, but a black dust, fine as ash and somehow luminous. It lifted into the air in spirals, as if exhaling centuries of memory. The whispers rose. Now they spoke not one name, but many dozens, then hundreds. Old names, forgotten ones, some uttered in sorrow, some in rage. Aldwych stepped forward, arm raised in command. This is the last breath. The residue of her will. Stay within the circle. Holmes threw a glance to me. Watson, your revolver. I produced it, though I had no target to aim for. The voices thickened. My thoughts turned sluggish. Sir Elric twitched in my grasp. I feared he would surge again. But then Holmes did something unexpected. He reached into his coat and withdrew the parchment we had found at Renly, the one marked Remember. Without an hesitation, he flung it into the ash-laden air. The effect was immediate. The dust coiled toward the scrap like iron to a magnet. The whispers shrieked once, then died. The ash was gone. The room fell still. Sir Elric slumped fully into my arms, unconscious. The broken tablet sat inert on the table. Aldwych closed his book and let out a long breath. Holmes turned to me. It wanted to be remembered, he said softly. Not as an evil, but as someone. That word, that parchment, it was a seed of identity. Perhaps she left it deliberately. Perhaps it was the last trace of who she had been, untainted by what the rite turned her into. I stared at him, stunned. You mean it wasn't just haunting Elric? It was pleading? In part, Holmes said. But it was also dangerous, fragmented, confused, hungry to be whole. She reached toward him because he awakened her, but the completion of the tablet didn't free her, it trapped her again. She chose not to fight. That final breath could have overwhelmed us. Instead, it dissipated. He turned to Aldwych. The Order will bury the shards, I assume? Burn them, Aldwych said. They are inert now, but no risk must remain. By midday, the ritual remnants were collected. Sir Elric awoke, groggy, free at last from the presence that had tormented him. His relief was profound and quiet. Holmes spoke little on the journey back to London, his mind already turning toward other puzzles. But I, in my quieter way, reflected deeply. For this case had not ended with chains or arrests, but with a whisper turned to silence and the strange, aching mercy of being remembered. Holmes, ever the rationalist, never once used the word ghost. But in his final comment, made as we entered Baker Street again beneath a cloudy sky, I saw the faint glimmer of his rarest quality, compassion. Watson, he said, pausing at the door, memory is the most dangerous thing of all. When it lingers too long, it can rot. But sometimes, it simply wants to be heard. And with that, he stepped inside. In the days that followed our return to Baker Street, life settled into its customary rhythm, or seemed to. Holmes read deeply, spoke little, and spent long hours sprawled across his settee, fingers steepled beneath his chin, his gaze lost in the curling smoke of his pipe. But I knew him well enough to detect the signs of lingering unrest. The whisperer might have been silenced, the tablet destroyed, but something in Holmes remained unsettled, not from fear, but from unfinished thought. I, too, found myself returning in memory to the moment the dust rose from that ancient stone, the voices swelling with names, and Holmes's act of throwing the parchment into the air like a final offering. It had worked, though by what precise mechanism, none of us could say. Holmes might call it symbolic closure, the triggering of a psychic reflex. Aldwych might call it spiritual resonance. I could not name it at all. But I sensed, even then, that the mystery had not ended, merely paused. It was on a grey morning 5 days later that the thread resumed. Holmes was seated at his desk, examining a collection of paper fragments retrieved from the tablet's resting place. They had been sent by Aldwych, who had meticulously recorded and photographed the symbols before their destruction. I was writing up the case in my journal when Mrs. Hudson entered with a telegram. Holmes read it once, then again, his brow furrowing. He passed it to me without comment. Telegram from Brother Toller, Exeter Convalescent Abbey. Urgent information on Verus. Not dead. Spotted 2 nights ago in York Minster. Insisted on speaking with the man who holds the memory. Warned of a second awakening. Please advise. T. I looked up sharply. Verus is alive? Holmes nodded. And if Toller is to be believed, he's aware of what we did. More importantly, he believes it is not over. Rose, already reaching for his coat. Watson, we must make haste. York Minster is not a place a man like Verus appears in by accident. The journey north was swift, but tense. As the train steamed through the countryside, Holmes spoke little. When he did, it was to question possibilities aloud, what Verus might have known, what he might still possess. It is conceivable, he said, that the tablet we found was not the only vessel. Memory does not always bind itself to one object. If Verus feared pursuit, he may have created another link, a failsafe. You mean a second whisper? I asked. Or an echo? Holmes replied grimly. We arrived in York under a pale, wintry sky, and made our way at once to the great minster, its vast Gothic spires rising like frozen waves of stone against the heavens. Inside, the hush was almost unnatural, not the stillness of reverence, but of waiting. A verger directed us to the crypt, where Brother Toller was waiting. He was an aged man with a fragile frame, wrapped in a thick woolen cloak. His eyes, however, were alert with purpose. I was not mistaken, he said, after Holmes introduced us. Verus was here, walked with a limp, stooped but unmistakable. He knelt at the tomb of St. William, then turned to me and said, The root was broken. Now the seed may grow. Tell the one who holds the memory that it was never just one name. Then he disappeared into the north aisle. Holmes was silent for a moment. Was that all? He left something. Toller handed Holmes a folded note. It was written in the same jagged script we had seen on the tablets, but this time interspersed with English phrases. Holmes translated slowly. I could not contain her. I could only scatter her. She exists now in pieces in places where sorrow lingers and names are forgotten. You joined too, but others remain. One stirs in the mourner's crypt. Stop it, or all voices will rise. I felt a chill run through me. What is the mourner's crypt? Toller gestured east. An old local legend. A forgotten burial chamber beneath the ruins of Coldmere Abbey, about a day's ride from here. Said to be cursed animals won't go near it. The abbey itself is long gone. Only the foundations remain. Holmes turned to me. That is our next destination. We reached Coldmere by dusk. The wind moaned across open moorland as we approached the ruins, little more than toppled stones and broken columns buried in heather and thyme. The locals had avoided the place, and the road leading up to it had all but vanished. But the foundations were still there, and beneath them, a narrow stair cut into the bedrock. Holmes led the way with lantern in hand. The steps were uneven and slick with moss. The air grew colder with each descent. At the bottom, we emerged into a vaulted chamber, half collapsed, the stonework dark with age. And there at the far end stood a single sarcophagus, It was smaller than the one at Renly, but unmistakably similar. The same black stone, the same veined silver lines. Only this time, the top was intact, sealed. Holmes circled it slowly, then crouched beside it. "There's something lodged here, a clasp of some kind." He extracted a rusted metallic hinge from the stone. "This lid has been shut since it was first laid." He motioned for me to assist, and together we pried the lid upward. It gave with a reluctant groan. Inside was not a body but another tablet. Holmes's jaw tensed. "Not just an echo," he said. "Another shard." The tablet bore different markings, but again the same central motif. The bound figure, the encircling forms, the many eyes. Then a sound came, soft, like breathing, though neither Holmes nor I had spoken. It came again, a low, rhythmic whisper, not from the stone, but from the air around us. We froze. Holmes placed a hand to the tablet. The whisper grew louder, but this time I could hear more than tones. I heard words, names, not ours, ancient names, some spoken as cries, some as chants. Holmes stepped back. "It's not targeting Elric this time. It's broadcasting, a call to the others." "We need to destroy it," I said. He nodded. "No ceremony, no ritual, just destruction." We carried the tablet outside, into the open wind. Holmes built a fire in the stone hollow of the ruined hearth, doused it with oil from the lantern, and we fed the tablet into the flames. It cracked, hissed, and screamed, not audibly, but in our skulls. We staggered. Holmes gritted his teeth, held his ground. The sound rose, twisted, and then snapped. The fire collapsed inward. The whisper was gone. We stood in silence for some time. Finally, Holmes spoke. "That was the second." I looked at him. "How many more do you think remain?" He stared at the ashes. Verus wrote, "Pieces, plural, scattered." "I fear this is not a mystery with a clean end, Watson. It may be that each time we uncover one, the others grow louder. We may have interrupted something ancient, something sentient." I saw a rare shadow in Holmes's eyes, then not fear, but respect. The kind he reserved for intellects that rivaled his own. And perhaps, for the first time, he wondered whether we had truly solved anything, or simply begun the real case at last. We lingered at the ruins of Coldmere Abbey well after nightfall, the flames of our makeshift fire dwindling among ancient stones, their light consumed by the endless moor. Holmes crouched in the cinders, studying the remains of the shattered tablet, while I leaned against a fallen pillar, my thoughts uneasy. The silence, after so much whispering, felt brittle and thin. Holmes finally straightened and wiped his hands. The tension in his face eased only slightly by the destruction of the artifact. "You saw, Watson, how the flame drew something from the stone, as if burning away the residue of thought. But I cannot shake the feeling that these tablets are less a prison for a single mind and more a lattice, an interwoven memory that seeks, always, to reunite with itself." Verus's warning weighs heavily. It was never just one name, nor even one voice. As we walked back up the slick stairs to the moor, the wind howled round the broken abbey, and I felt a chill settle on my skin. "Holmes, do you suppose Verus left other clues? We cannot chase phantoms forever. There must be a pattern to the places chosen. Renly. Q. Cold. Mere." Holmes's eyes narrowed as we trudged toward the waiting cart, its driver dozing beneath a rough blanket. "You are, as ever, most helpful, Watson. There is always a pattern, even if the design is ancient and partially effaced. These sites are bound not just by history, but by meaning. Each is a place where memory lingers, and sorrow has settled for centuries. Consider, a manor built upon Roman graves, a tree planted by a secretive order, an abbey ruined by grief. The next fragment, if there is one, will not be hidden at random, but in a place weighted with remembrance and loss. As we rode back toward York in the night, Holmes lapsed into silence, deep in thought. It was nearly dawn when we arrived at our lodgings near the Minster, and after a few fitful hours of rest, he summoned me to the window, eyes alight with new resolve. "Watson, I believe I know our next destination. Recall the names spoken by the whisper at Coldmere. You heard the word Ely among them, did you not?" I nodded, surprised by the clarity of the memory. Yes, it was clear as any bell, a woman's voice. Then a child's. Holmes's lips tightened. Ely Cathedral, then. It is a place of pilgrimage and pain, a place where generations have come to mourn. If Verus scattered the fragments as seeds, he would have chosen such ground. We must go to Ely. The journey to Cambridgeshire was long, but uneventful. As the cathedral's magnificent lantern tower rose above the fens, I felt the weight of our task settle upon me anew. Holmes questioned the verger and the cathedral librarian, inquiring about recent disturbances, legends, or unexplained events. At first, the men gave only cautious answers, tales of ghostly singing in the Lady Chapel at midnight, of strange cold draughts and doors found open that should have been locked. Holmes asked to be taken below, to the crypts that wound beneath the nave. The air down there was sharp and damp, thick with the mineral scent of centuries. Holmes paused at a branching corridor, noting the old mortuary plaques. He traced a finger along one and smiled. "Watson, look here. To Agnes de Morton, whose grief endured beyond death, let memory be gentle and peace unbroken." We stood before an ancient tomb, its lid carved with a likeness of a woman in prayer, her eyes closed, her features worn smooth by time and touch. Holmes knelt and examined the stone. "The edges have been disturbed recently. See the fine powder along the seam? Someone opened this perhaps within the month." My pulse quickened as Holmes produced a small crowbar and gently worked it under the lid. The stone shifted with a reluctant groan, revealing a shallow cavity within. There was no body. Only a layer of velvet cloth, and resting atop it, another stone fragment, marked with the same alien script and encircled by the faint outline of many eyes. Holmes exhaled slowly, his expression grave. "Another shard, and more recent. Watson, help me lift it out." As our hands touched the stone, a coldness crept up my arms, unlike any physical chill. The air vibrated with a distant murmur, not yet a whisper, but a memory seeking purchase. Holmes wrapped the tablet in a length of oilcloth, and for a moment the voices faded. We carried the shard into the daylight, but Holmes would not rest. "I must understand this script," he muttered, pacing the cathedral close. "It is neither ancient nor modern. It shifts, as if alive. It is written to be read by those who remember, not those who learn." Just then, a shadow fell over us. A woman stood nearby, her hair silver, her gaze penetrating. She wore a scholar's robe, and her voice was calm and low. "You found it, then?" The last voice of Agnes de Morton. Holmes regarded her sharply. "You know what this is?" She nodded. "I am Dr. Catherine Norwood, keeper of folklore at Cambridge. Verus visited me last year, seeking records of persistent hauntings. He believed the fragments might draw the attention of the living to warn or to complete the tale." Holmes inclined his head. "What do you know of the tale?" Dr. Norwood hesitated. "It is said Agnes's grief was so profound that it imprinted itself on stone. The tablet was meant to hold her sorrow, but also her hope. If reunited with the others, she believed her memory might become whole and so at peace. But Verus was afraid the reunion would do the opposite, awaken not just memory, but will." Holmes's eyes grew bright. "What would you do, Dr. Norwood, if you held such a fragment?" Her answer was immediate. "I would bury it in blessed ground and speak her name with compassion. The tablets respond to memory. They echo what we bring." Holmes pondered this. "Then let us attempt it." In the shadow of Ely's great walls, Dr. Norwood led a brief, gentle ritual, speaking Agnes's name, her story, and her longing for peace. Holmes placed the fragment in a hollow at the foot of the ancient yew tree and covered it with earth. As the soil fell, the air shifted, the low hum receded, The chill abated. Holmes was silent a long moment, then turned to me. That was not an exorcism, Watson. It was a reconciliation. I saw then that this was not a case of hunting evil, but of healing a wound, centuries deep. As we left Ely, Holmes murmured, "If all the fragments can be so soothed, perhaps the whisper will become what it was always meant to be, a gentle memory, not a cry in the dark." But his eyes, as the fenland mists closed behind us, betrayed a deeper concern. For the pattern, though gentler now, was not yet finished, and the last, most dangerous fragment, Holmes suspected, still awaited us. Our return from Ely to London was marked by a new, solemn clarity. Holmes, for all his logic, seemed to be treading ground, not of intellect, but of intuition, a thing he would have scoffed at in any other case. I watched him as we rode the train through the autumn fens, the last of the day's sun flickering over his pale features. He said little, his fingers restlessly tapping on his thigh, eyes locked on the passing landscape, but seeing nothing of it. When we reached Baker Street, a telegram awaited us sent from Father Aldwych. Holmes tore it open and read in silence before handing it to me. The message was simple but chilling. Brother Verus has vanished. Rumour places him near Canterbury. I feel the end is near. The last fragment lies in the place of the original binding. God guide you both. Holmes read the lines once more. The place of the original binding. That can mean only one thing. Renly Hall. Everything began there, Watson. Every thread of this tale leads us back to that singular vault. Despite the hour, Holmes immediately sent word to Sir Elric Mortlake, requesting he prepare the hall for our arrival. Our journey began at dawn, each mile drawing us nearer to the seat of that ancient unease. When we arrived, the estate seemed already shrouded by anticipation. Garvin met us at the door, his eyes hollow, the lines on his face deepened by worry. "The hall's been restless," he muttered as he led us inside. Doors banging, voices in the night. I keep the staff away from the chapel wing now. Sir Elric, though paler, seemed steadier than when last we saw him. He greeted us in the library, where Holmes immediately gathered the remnants of the first shattered tablet, inspecting them for any overlooked marks. "It will be beneath the chapel," he murmured. "The sarcophagus, the site of the first awakening." We descended the now familiar spiral stair, the passage colder than before, the shadows pooling more thickly as our lanterns flickered. At the entrance to the undercroft, Holmes paused, cocking his head. A thin, reedy voice called out from the darkness, "You are late, Mr. Holmes." Brother Verus stood in the shadows, a tall figure stooped with age and exhaustion. His eyes glimmered, but whether with malice or sorrow I could not tell. In his hands, cradled like a child, was the last stone fragment larger than any we had yet recovered, carved with the same intricate pattern of script and many staring eyes. Holmes approached him without fear, his voice quiet. "Verus, you have held this burden alone too long. Let us end it." The old monk's grip tightened on the fragment. "Do you know what you risk? To bring all the pieces together is to risk not only her awakening, but your own undoing. The fragments hunger for memory, for sorrow, for any strong emotion they may root themselves in. I have heard her, every night, all these years. She is not only grief, she is rage, she is longing, she is loneliness incarnate. What will you give her if you reassemble her heart?" Holmes did not waver. "We do not intend to summon. We intend to reconcile as we did at Ely. She must be remembered in gentleness, not dread." Verus's hands shook. "And if you are wrong?" Holmes looked him in the eyes. "Then let that be my burden. But to leave her broken is to let her torment the living and the dead alike." There was a long moment of tension. At last, Verus knelt and placed the fragment upon the floor. Inside the old salt circle, Holmes had drawn months before. Holmes worked quickly, fitting together the remnants from Renly, the fragment from Ely retrieved with Dr. Norwood's blessing, and the piece from Cold Mere, joining them at last with Verus's offering. The assembled tablet, though cracked and incomplete, now resembled a mosaic of sorrow and longing. The image at its heart was clearer. The veiled figure, bound and yet reaching out, encircled by the eyes of witnesses. Holmes stood back. Sir Elric, Dr. Norwood, Father Aldwych stand with us. Let there be no fear, only memory. The assembled company formed a circle, Holmes leading a litany of remembrance, reciting the names of the lost, the stories of Agnes de Morton and the others whose voices had echoed from the tablets. As he spoke, a wind rose within the chamber. The salt at our feet shimmered, and the air filled with a low harmonic resonance, not a whisper, but a hymn. For a moment, I felt my own memories stirred childhood griefs, the faces of the fallen from Afghanistan, the ache of old regrets. Yet the force in the room was not suffocating, but oddly clarifying, as if pain, acknowledged, could be transformed. The tablet at the circle's center pulsed with light. The voices rose, not in agony, but in chorus, hundreds of names spoken with the cadence of release. I saw Sir Elric begin to weep, Dr. Norwood's lips move in silent prayer, even Verus, gaunt and trembling, stand a little taller. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the voices ceased. The light faded from the tablet. The stone fragments fell apart, their edges crumbling at last into dust. A warmth lingered in the chamber, peace palpable and real. Holmes knelt, touching the dust with gentle fingers. "It is finished," he said softly. "Memory, at last, is gentle." Verus bowed his head, tears sliding silently down his cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I could not have borne it any longer." Father Aldwych closed his eyes and crossed himself. Dr. Norwood offered a small, relieved smile. Sir Elric, his face transformed, looked around in wonder, as if seeing the world for the first time. We climbed the stair into the morning light, the house silent at last, no longer oppressed by the whisper. In the drawing room, Holmes poured tea with steady hands, his features calm. Yet I knew this peace was hard-won, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the return of hope. Holmes caught my gaze, and with the barest glimmer of a smile said, "But in being remembered, we are made whole." And so ended the long night of the whisper, a darkness broken not by cunning or violence, but by the simple grace of compassion and remembrance. The hush that settled over Renly Hall was unlike any peace I had known in a house so long beset by dread. In the hours after the ritual, Holmes sat quietly in the library, hands folded, his gaze distant and strangely tender. The company drifted into silence, each of us retreating inward, each nursing the strange exhaustion that comes not from physical trial, but from spiritual battle. For the first time since the case began, I sensed no lurking presence in the corners, no pressure behind the eyes, no tug in the marrow of the bones. The house was truly free. Holmes permitted himself a rare moment of leisure. With the others resting or tending to their own affairs, he set aside his usual stack of monographs and, to my mild astonishment, accepted a glass of claret from Sir Elric's well-stocked cabinet. We sat together in the fading golden light, the library doors open to the late autumn air, the world outside just beginning to settle into dusk. After a time, Holmes spoke. "You see, Watson, how even the most logical mind may be drawn, despite itself, into mysteries that cannot be explained by deduction alone. I have always dismissed the supernatural as a veil for ignorance, yet in this case the veil concealed something very real, a pattern of memory and grief, woven so tightly with the fabric of place and person that it required not only reason, but compassion, to resolve." Nodded, still half disbelieving what we had witnessed in the Undercroft, the gathering of fragments, the luminous harmony, the unmaking of ancient sorrow. "I find myself at a loss, Holmes. I can explain the rituals, the psychology, even the mechanics of suggestion. But the feeling in that room, there was something more, something shared." Holmes smiled faintly. "The greatest mysteries, Watson, are those that touch us all. Grief, love, memory. These are not solved, only understood, and when we are fortunate, reconciled. Our conversation was interrupted by Garvin, the old caretaker, who entered with the uncertain step of a man expecting trouble but finding none. "There's a gentleman at the door, sir. Says he's an antiquarian from Cambridge. Insisted he must see you at once." Holmes and I exchanged glances. "Show him in, Garvin," Holmes said. The visitor proved to be a small, sprightly man in spectacles, his arms clutching a folio of notes. He introduced himself as Mr. Oswald Pettigrew, a colleague of Dr. Norwood's. "My apologies for the intrusion, gentlemen, but I've come directly from Ely at her urgent request. I believe you may find this relevant." He produced a letter and laid it before Holmes. "Dr. Norwood sent this yesterday, but I felt it prudent to deliver it in person after what occurred at the cathedral. It concerns something found in the archives after your departure, a journal penned by Agnes de Morton herself." Holmes unfolded the faded manuscript, eyes flicking rapidly over the neat, looping hand. I read over his shoulder. "If I am not to be remembered as only a voice of sorrow, let this be my testament. Grief carves deep, but love plants roots. I bind my longing not to haunt, but to guard, should any come after in need. Let remembrance be a gift, not a curse." Holmes sat back, a soft exhalation escaping him. She knew, Watson. She intended her memory not for vengeance but for healing. The fragment's power was never wholly malign. It was the breaking the division that twisted them. Mr. Pettigrew nodded. "Dr. Norwood believes this confirms your approach. She asked that you be told you did more than solve a puzzle, you mended a wound." Holmes smiled, a rare warmth in his eyes. "Then let us hope it stays mended." He offered Mr. Pettigrew a seat, and the three of us spoke at length about memory, legacy, and the curious ways in which the past seeks out the present. Holmes, who would usually eschew such talk as sentimental, seemed content to listen. The edge of his intellect gentled for the time being. That evening, after our guest had departed and Sir Elric had gone to bed, Holmes and I took one last turn about the hall and grounds. The night air was crisp and bracing, the windows of Renly aglow with reassuring lamplight. At the edge of the old chapel, Holmes paused and looked up at the star-pricked sky. "There is, I think, a lesson in this, Watson. The past cannot be severed from us by force. It must be invited to speak, and then laid to rest with kindness." I thought of Agnes de Morton, of the voices at Ely, of Verus carrying his fragment of sorrow for so many years. "Do you believe there will be more, Holmes? Other voices, other fragments?" Holmes considered this, then shook his head. "No case is ever truly finished, my friend. But for now, the chain is broken. The echo will fade, and if ever it should rise again, I trust there will be others, scholars, guardians, those who remember who will know to answer with understanding, not fear." A soft wind stirred the grass, and somewhere in the dark a nightingale began to sing. Holmes smiled at the sound, a rare, unguarded smile, and for a moment I glimpsed the man behind the mask, the friend whose brilliance, so often cold and remote, could burn with a light as gentle as it was fierce. We returned inside, the house finally at peace. As I closed the diary on this most unusual case, I found myself grateful not only for its resolution, but for the reminder that sometimes the bravest thing one can do is simply to listen. Holmes, already at the window, regarded the fog outside with a distant look. "Come, Watson," he said at last, his voice carrying both finality and hope. "Let us leave the past to its dreams. There will always be another dawn and another mystery." And so we did. The next morning dawned clear and pale, a crispness in the air that carried the promise of change. Baker Street felt almost unfamiliar in its tranquility after the tribulations of the preceding weeks. I rose early. still half expecting some echo of the case to find its way into our lives, a final whisper, an unbidden chill, a reminder that what we had faced might not be so easily laid to rest. Yet, as I prepared coffee and looked out on the brightening city, I found only calm. Holmes, always an early riser after a case concluded, sat at the table with his customary composure, reading the morning papers. The fire crackled in the grate, lending the sitting room a golden glow. He glanced up as I entered, his expression softer than usual. "Restless, Watson?" he asked. I smiled, merely contemplative. I find my mind lingering over the Mortlake affair. "Do you truly believe it is finished?" Holmes set aside the newspaper and steepled his fingers, the old glint of reason returning to his eyes. "As finished as such things can be. You see, the business of memory, of grief and healing, is never quite closed. But I am convinced that the chain which bound those voices has been broken, not by force but by understanding. That is the best outcome we could have hoped for." He rose and began to pace, not with agitation, but with the easy energy that came when a puzzle had found its solution. "It is an odd thing, Watson, how the cases which trouble us most deeply are not those solved by logic alone. When the spirit is engaged, when the cost is measured in more than facts, resolution carries a different weight." Before I could answer, a sharp rap sounded at the door. Mrs. Hudson appeared, bearing an envelope. "A letter for you, Mr. Holmes." The boy said it was urgent. Holmes took the envelope, noting the unfamiliar seal, a ring of laurels enclosing a single eye. He slit it open and withdrew a single sheet, the handwriting spare and elegant. Asterisk, "Mr. Holmes, you have my gratitude. The disturbance at Ely has ceased, as has the unrest at Coldmere and Renly. Dr. Norwood wishes you to know the cathedral choir sings without interruption, and the crypt is quiet. I, too, find peace at last. I have retired from my guardianship, but should you need guidance regarding other matters of memory and sorrow, you know where to find me. Yours." Brother Verus Times Holmes folded the letter, a contented smile flickering at his lips. "A postscript from the past, Watson. It seems the guardians have also found their rest." We sat, for a time, in companionable silence. Then Holmes, with a twinkle in his eye, turned to his violin and drew from it a gentle, melancholy melody, a fitting tribute, I thought, for those who had waited so long to be heard. The music lingered through the morning, drifting over Baker Street, neither happy nor sad, but filled with the serenity of acceptance. A little before noon, a visitor arrived, Sir Elric Mortlake himself, looking more robust than I had ever seen him. He greeted us with warmth and, after settling into an armchair, spoke with the sincerity of a man unburdened. "You cannot imagine my relief, gentlemen. Since the ritual, I have slept without dreams. Renly feels lighter, alive even. I wish to thank you, Holmes, not only for saving me, but for restoring my family's name and peace to our home." Holmes inclined his head graciously. "It was your courage, Sir Elric, that allowed us to see the case through. Few men would have faced such darkness." Sir Elric smiled. "If you ever need the hall, again, it is yours." We exchanged reminiscences and, as the afternoon waned, Sir Elric took his leave. The sense of closure he carried away seemed to settle on our household as well. Later that day, as twilight crept through the window, Holmes drew from a stack of correspondence a small note. He handed it to me with a knowing look. "Read this, Watson." It was from Dr. Norwood. "My dear Holmes, I find myself returning often to the Lady Chapel. The air is changed, clear, unburdened. Memory, it seems, is not a chain but a tapestry, and the threads you wove there have mended what was torn. Should you wish to discuss matters further, I remain at Cambridge. Yours, C." Norwood. Holmes watched me read, then said, "You see, Watson, our work touches more than we realize. It ripples outward, quiet but persistent." I could only agree. The meaning of this case, the legacy of the Whisper, would, I suspected, stay with us far longer than most of our more celebrated adventures. There was no glory here, no clever culprit unmasked for public applause, but something deeper and more lasting. As darkness fell and the lamplighter passed by, Holmes returned to his armchair, gazing thoughtfully into the fire. I wrote up the final lines of my account, struck by a sense of gratitude, not just for a case resolved, but for a friend who had faced the unknown with humility as well as brilliance. Outside, London returned to its restless rhythm. Within 221B, we sat in the hush that follows a storm, savoring the rarest of victories, the kind that comes not from conquest, but from understanding and peace. Holmes broke the silence at last. "A most unusual affair, Watson. But if ever you doubt the worth of listening to a whisper, remember Renly, and the night the past spoke not to terrify, but to be healed." And there, as the clock chimed midnight, we let the curtain fall on the case of the whisper that broke a man, its echo gentle now, and its lessons deeply etched in both our hearts. The days that followed the closing of the Renly case unfolded with the quiet regularity of autumn's end. The gaslit streets outside 221B Baker Street, so lately the haunt of shadows and disquiet, now seemed possessed of a new clarity, a briskness in the air and a bright cheer in the windows that made London feel, for a little while, like a city entirely untroubled by the mysteries that so often drew Holmes and me from our fireside. But the echoes of our ordeal lingered, not as dread, but as an undercurrent of reflection. Each morning, Holmes and I returned to our familiar routines, yet I sensed a subtle transformation in both of us, as if the resolution of that strange, sorrowful affair had marked our friendship with a deeper shade of empathy. It was a Tuesday afternoon, several weeks since Sir Elric Mortlake's visit, when Holmes broke from his perusal of the Times and fixed me with a look of unusual gravity. "You have been quiet, Watson. Has the case left you uneasy?" I looked up from my notebook, where I'd begun the first public draft of The Whisper That Broke a Man, determined, for once, to capture the finer shades of mystery and mercy that Holmes so often left unremarked in his accounts. "Not uneasy, Holmes," I replied, "but changed, I suppose. I keep turning over that last moment in the Undercroft, the sense that what we laid to rest was not merely a spirit, but the grief of centuries. I wonder how many other sorrows, unspoken, persist in the world, waiting for someone to listen." Holmes regarded me for a long moment, then offered one of his rare, genuine smiles. "It is the fate of the sensitive, Watson, to carry the burdens of those who cannot speak for themselves. That is the true work of healing, far more difficult than solving crimes." Before I could reply, Mrs. Hudson entered with a small box, postmarked Cambridge. "For you, Dr. Watson. And there's a letter for Mr. Holmes, too." I opened the box to find a slim, leather-bound volume, the Journal of Agnes de Morton. Inside, Dr. Norwood had left a brief note. "Dear Dr. Watson, your compassion was as crucial as Mr. Holmes's reason. May this testament remind you that every memory is a story, and every story deserves an ending. Yours sincerely, Catherine Norwood." Holmes's letter, bearing the same hand, was even briefer. "Mr. Holmes, the cathedral's stones are silent, the choir sings undisturbed. I will not forget what was accomplished, nor by whom. Should memory ever trouble London again, you know you are not alone. C. Norwood." I placed the journal carefully among my papers, feeling an unexpected sense of closure. The stories of Agnes, full of longing but also hope, made plain that what we had released at Renly was not vengeful, but yearning to be heard. It was a quiet comfort, that night, as the fog rolled in and the city blurred into a world of lamplight and shadow. Holmes and I found ourselves in quiet conversation beside the hearth. The violin, lately so prominent in our evenings, lay untouched on the table. Holmes stared into the fire, his expression unusually reflective. "You know, Watson," he said softly, "there are some mysteries that change one's perspective not by their complexity, but by their humanity. I have always trusted in logic, but logic alone cannot mend a wound carried through generations. Sometimes, the best deduction is simply to listen. I could not disagree. And what will you do when the next whisper finds you? Holmes smiled, a little wryly. I suppose I shall listen more carefully, and I shall trust that you will be there to remind me of what I am in danger of forgetting, that every mind, even mine, needs the temper of kindness. We sat in companionable silence for a while. The fire burned low, and I thought of all the rooms now at peace, all the echoes that had been gentled, not erased. When at last we retired, I knew something had altered between us no less, the bond of adventure. But now a deeper sympathy, forged in the crucible of a case that had been as much about healing as about solving. A few days later, Holmes resumed his old routines. Brisk walks in the park, mornings spent in scientific correspondence, the occasional minor case involving a missing emerald or a troublesome cousin. But I noticed the difference. He lingered longer in conversation with Mrs. Hudson, offered small courtesies to street children, and twice accompanied me to visit wounded soldiers at the hospital. His wit remained as sharp as ever, but there was a new patience beneath it, a willingness to let the world speak before he answered. One evening, as we prepared for bed, Holmes paused by the window. The fog was thick again, but there was music drifting up from the street, a woman's voice, faint but clear, singing some ancient lullaby. Holmes listened for a while, his face softened by the melody. "Watson," he said, "do you suppose there are other whispers, still waiting to be heard?" I smiled. "I am certain of it, Holmes. But perhaps, after all we've seen, we shall know better how to listen and how to help." He nodded, satisfied, and together we turned from the window, letting the city and its secrets rest for one more night. And thus it was that the case of the whisper that broke a man left its truest mark, not in the annals of crime, but in the quiet, lasting transformation of two friends, detective and doctor, logic and empathy, each made more whole by having truly heard the other and the past. So autumn melted into winter, and the world outside our window drifted on beneath London's restless tides. In the weeks after the resolution of the Mortlake affair, Holmes and I eased back into the comforting rituals of our shared life. He with his chemical experiments and casework, I with my practice and the chronicling of our adventures. Yet it was not the rattle of hansom cabs or the shouts of newsboys that haunted my thoughts, but the soft, insistent echo of what we had witnessed in the Undercroft at Renly. For the first time in many years, I found myself less preoccupied by the search for answers and more attentive to the mysteries carried quietly within the hearts of those around me. It was a time of healing, not only for Sir Elric Mortlake and those touched by the ancient sorrow, but for us as well. Holmes, who for so long had prided himself on the triumph of reason, now seemed to move with a new humility, an awareness that the world's greatest puzzles were not always solved by intellect alone. His nights, once spent in restless vigils over unsolved ciphers, grew quieter. His mornings, which had often begun in brisk detachment, now started with small kindnesses, a warm greeting for Mrs. Hudson, a shared joke with the lamplighter on the corner, or a moment spent simply listening to the quiet pulse of Baker Street. For my part, I found myself changed as well. The journals of Agnes de Morton, sent by Dr. Norwood, reminded me daily of how stories might endure through centuries, not as curses but as gifts, if only we learned to listen. Each page I turned, each scrap of memory or fragment of hope, called me back to that luminous moment beneath the hall, when a host of broken voices became, for an instant, a single song of release. One evening in December, Holmes and I were invited by Dr. Norwood to a gathering at Cambridge, a symposium on folklore and memory, where scholars debated not only the hauntings of stone and story, but the capacity for healing in remembrance. Holmes, who rarely attended such affairs, surprised me by accepting at once. "I think," he remarked, as we journeyed north by train, "that it is time we learned what other whispers might say, when met not with suspicion, but with inquiry and respect." The evening proved richer than either of us expected. Dr. Norwood spoke movingly of Agnes, and Father Aldwych delivered a paper on the rituals of reconciliation in forgotten abbeys. Holmes, who seldom spoke in public, gave a brief but memorable address on the relationship between logic and compassion, how the pursuit of truth, when divorced from understanding, can deepen wounds rather than close them. Afterward, as the guests mingled in the candle-lit hall, Holmes and I found a quiet corner. The air was fragrant with the scent of mulled wine and pine boughs. Outside, snow had begun to fall. "Watson," Holmes said softly, "there is a world of hidden wounds in these old stones. I think we have learned at some cost that the task of the detective is not only to expose secrets, but to help bear them." I nodded, feeling the truth of it in my bones. "We can do more good than we know, Holmes. Sometimes by solving, sometimes by simply attending, by refusing to turn away." He regarded me with that rare warmth, the firelight reflected in his keen eyes. "You have always understood that, my friend. I am grateful for it." We lingered at Cambridge for 2 more days, meeting with Dr. Norwood and a handful of others who had, in one way or another, touched the boundaries of memory and loss. Some spoke of ancient curses, others of family stories passed in whispers. A common thread ran through all their accounts: the power of being heard, of naming and acknowledging grief, and thus transforming it. On our return to London, Holmes seemed at peace. "You know, Watson, there is a symmetry to this case that pleases me. We began with a whisper that broke a man, and ended with a chorus that restored many. It is not often we see such a complete cycle in our work." The days grew shorter, and soon Christmas arrived. Holmes and I spent it quietly, as we often did by the fireside, exchanging gifts: mine, a rare monograph on plant-based alkaloids; his, a handsome pen for my writing. We toasted Sir Elric, Dr. Norwood, and all who had helped bring the affair to its end, and for the first time in years, Holmes proposed a toast to the power of kindness, wherever it may be found. By New Year's, the city was buried beneath snow. Yet the mood in Baker Street was one of gentle optimism. Letters from Sir Elric arrived, full of news about the restoration of the hall and its renewed charity for the village. Father Aldwych wrote to say that, at last, he was retiring to a small parish, content in the knowledge that some burdens can, after all, be laid down. It was during one of those silent evenings, as Holmes and I sat in the glow of the lamp, that a final, unexpected letter arrived. It was addressed to me, the hand unfamiliar, *, "Dear Dr. Watson, if you wonder whether memory can truly heal, know that I have found peace at last. Your compassion and Mr. Holmes's courage gave voice to what was silent for too long. Let this be my last word. Grief and hope are never wholly parted. In remembering both, we are made whole." Agnes de Morton, as recalled by Catherine Norwood. Times I read it aloud to Holmes, who listened in silence. Then, with a rare gentleness, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "Well, Watson," he said, "there is your answer. We have done some good." In the weeks that followed, cases came and went, some trivial, some troubling, but none quite like the whisper that had so nearly broken a man, and instead, in the end, had drawn together the scattered pieces of many lives. As I finished the final lines of my account, I looked up to see Holmes already reading, his expression content. The city outside faded into quiet, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of true completion. Holmes caught my gaze, and with that rare, knowing smile, said, "The world is full of mysteries, my dear Watson, but it is also full of hope. Let us be content with that until the next case calls us forth." And so, as the last embers glowed in the hearth, we closed the ledger on the case of the whisper that broke a man, its lesson not lost, but woven into the fabric of our days, a whisper made gentle by the act of being heard. The final weeks of that remarkable winter slipped by with a gentleness both unfamiliar and welcome. Holmes and I resumed the quiet customs of Baker Street, his days absorbed in arcane chemistry or the violin, mine occupied by patience and the steady work of writing up our cases. But the shadow of Renly Hall, of Agnes de Morton, and the whisper that had so nearly unravelled reason had left its mark one neither of us could or wished to erase. It was a bright, brittle morning in February when Holmes, returned from a stroll in Regent's Park, found me putting the last touches to my account. The case had been, in many ways, unlike any other. Its solution a matter not only of deduction, but of understanding the hidden contours of sorrow, memory, and mercy. He settled into his chair, a wisp of frost in his dark hair and a faint smile on his lips. "You have finished it, Watson." I nodded. "The whole affair, every fragment, every voice." "I hope I have done it justice." Holmes leaned forward, fingertips pressed together. "Justice is not always a matter of the law, nor even of truth, my friend. Sometimes it is found in what is restored in peace, given back to the living and the dead alike." We sat for a while in companionable silence, the fire snapping softly. At length Holmes spoke, the analytical glint in his eyes now shaded by something more thoughtful. "It occurs to me, Watson, that the clues in this case were never merely the broken tablets or the ancient scripts. The true thread was memory itself, how it endures, distorts, or heals. Each person touched by Agnes's sorrow carried their own fragment, their own longing to be heard or absolved. Sir Elric's dread, Verus's loneliness, Aldwich's sense of duty, each became a vessel for that unfinished story. I considered this, thinking of Sir Elric's face, now so much changed from that first haunted day, of Dr. Norwood, who had helped us to see memory as something to reconcile, not to banish, of Holmes himself, who had grown in compassion even as he unravelled the web of the past. Holmes continued, "We solved nothing by force. We listened, we named, we remembered. The true culprit was not malice but division, the splitting of one memory into 1,000 haunted fragments. In reuniting them, we did not simply end a haunting, we helped transform pain into peace." There was a knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson appeared, this time with a letter from Sir Elric Mortlake, written in a firm, confident hand. Asterisk, "Dear Holmes and Dr. Watson, Renly is quiet at last. The village speaks of a new era, the old fears gone, the house open and bright. I have begun inviting guests to the hall again, and the charity work in Agnes's name continues. Please know that you are always welcome here. The past is at peace, and so am I. With gratitude, Sir Elric Mortlake Times Holmes smiled and handed me the letter. So much of our work, Watson, is unheralded, forgotten by all but those who suffered. Yet in this, perhaps, we have mended not only a man, but a lineage, a village, and a memory." I put down my pen, sensing the story was truly ended. The lessons of the case, the necessity of listening, of honoring sorrow with gentleness would linger far beyond these pages. Holmes, seeing my reflection, spoke one last time with the solemnity reserved for moments of real meaning. "There will be other mysteries, Watson, darker or more dramatic. But I think we shall remember this one longest, for it taught us that the deepest puzzles are not always found in the shadows of crime, but in the hearts of those who suffer quietly." We stood together at the window, watching the city's endless dance of life, each soul carrying secrets. Each day, a new beginning. As I closed the ledger for good, I realized that the case of the whisper that broke a man had become, in the end, a testament not to the power of intellect, but to the quiet, persistent hope that endures when compassion answers sorrow. And so, with Holmes by my side, I stepped forward into the fresh-lit world, grateful for the case that had left us. At last, not with dread, but with understanding, forgiveness, and peace.